She was making 16.75 an hour. He controlled half the construction contracts in British Columbia. When he threw his room key across the front desk and told her she was incompetent in front of a lobby full of people, every staff member within earshot went completely still, because they all knew exactly who he was. But what nobody expected, not the concierge frozen 3 feet away, not the bellman pretending to organize luggage carts, not the assistant trailing behind with a tablet and a look of practiced neutrality, was what Hazel did next. She picked up the key card from where it had skidded across her keyboard. She set it down on the counter with a precise, deliberate click, and she looked at him with the kind of steadiness that only comes from having absolutely nothing left to lose, and said, very quietly, "Speak to me like that again, and you will never set foot in this hotel as long as I'm standing behind this desk." The silence that followed lasted approximately 4 seconds. It felt considerably longer. The Meridian Grand had been a fixture on Vancouver's waterfront since 1987, the kind of hotel that didn't advertise because it didn't need to. It had 312 rooms, a rooftop restaurant that required a reservation 3 weeks in advance, a spa that charged more per hour than most people made in a day, and a front desk team that was trained extensively and repeatedly to smile through anything. Anything. Late-night noise complaints from penthouse guests, wedding parties that turned into insurance claims, celebrities who mistook courtesy for permission. Hazel Morrow had worked the front desk for 2 years, 7 months, and 16 days. She knew this not because she was sentimental about it, but because she kept a small calendar in her phone's notes app, counting toward the date she'd calculated as her runway, the point at which she'd have enough saved to take the 12-week medical administration certificate program at BCIT without going into debt. The certificate would let her leave hospitality and move into something with better hours, a pension, and the kind of stability that didn't depend entirely on whether a guest decided to be reasonable. Hazel was 29 years old. She stood 5'3", kept her dark brown hair in a low knot during shifts, and had the specific posture of someone who had been told since her first performance review that she had an excellent guest presence, which was the hotel industry's way of saying. She smiled convincingly even when she didn't feel like it. Her younger brother, Owen, she called him that in her head even though his legal name was now Ewan, a change he'd made at 19 for reasons he'd explained once and she hadn't asked about again, lived with her in the 2-bedroom apartment on Cambie Street. Owen was 24 and had been recovering from a spinal injury for 11 months. A construction site accident, a Monday morning in February. A scaffold that hadn't been secured the way it was supposed to be. He hadn't sued because the circumstances were complicated in ways that made the lawyer they'd initially consulted cautious and then unavailable. He was improving. Slowly. The physiotherapy sessions were $145 each, twice a week, partially covered by a provincial plan that was, in the polite language of the coverage documents, subject to annual reassessment. Hazel paid the gap. She paid the rent. She paid the grocery bill and the transit pass and the copay on the medication that helped Owen sleep through the nerve pain. She did this on $16.75 an hour, plus the occasional tip from guests who felt like being generous, minus the income tax that had surprised her the first year she'd done her own filing. She did cancelled her gym membership in March and used the YouTube videos instead. She bought her coffee from the staff room machine and pretended it was fine, which it almost was. She did all of this without complaint, because complaining was not a useful allocation of energy, and because Owen had enough guilt about the situation without her adding to it. She smiled when guests checked in. She smiled because the Meridian Grand had a framed statement of values behind every front desk in every property in their portfolio, and the third line read, "Every guest carries something invisible. You are the first person they meet." Hazel believed this. She believed it on the mornings she'd had 4 hours of sleep, and her feet were already aching before the first shuttle from the airport arrived. On the afternoon of a Tuesday in late October, Fletcher Strand walked into the Meridian Grand at 3:17 p.m. He was preceded by his reputation and followed by 2 people, a woman in her 30s with an earpiece and a phone, and a man in his 40s carrying a leather folio who had the look of someone paid specifically to anticipate problems. Fletcher Strand himself was 53, broad-shouldered, with silver hair that cost money to look that effortless, and the kind of jaw that suggested he had never once in his adult life been told to wait. He was the founder and majority shareholder of Strand Capital Group, which was a name that appeared regularly in the business section of the Vancouver Sun in the context of waterfront development, provincial infrastructure bids, and at least 2 editorial columns that had described his company's practices as aggressive, without quite crossing into actionable territory. He walked to the front desk the way men walk when they believe the space belongs to them, regardless of whose name is on the lease. Strand. Presidential suite, I called ahead. Hazel pulled up the reservation. Welcome to the Meridian Grand, Mr. Strand. I have your booking, checking in through Saturday. I'll just need a credit card for incidentals. You already have one on file. We do, yes. This is just standard confirmation procedure for, I've stayed here 11 times. He wasn't looking at her. He was looking at his phone. I understand, it's our policy for, process it and give me the key. She processed it. She gave him the key. She explained that the rooftop restaurant had a reservation already confirmed for that evening under his name, that his car service was on file with the concierge, and that the spa had blocked his preferred time slot tomorrow morning. She delivered all of this with the warm efficiency that her last performance review had described as one of her strongest professional attributes. He took the keycard without looking at her and walked to the elevator. The woman with the earpiece glanced back at Hazel as she followed. Hazel couldn't read the expression entirely, but it contained something that might have been an apology, if apologies came in micro-expressions. That was Tuesday. By Thursday morning, Hazel had interacted with Fletcher Strand 4 times, each of them brief, each of them conducted on his terms, which meant she was available when he needed something and invisible when he didn't. She had sorted out a billing discrepancy on his restaurant charge, arranged a last-minute extension of his checkout time, and redirected a call from a journalist who had called the hotel's main line asking to speak with him. A call she'd handled with the careful neutrality of someone who understood the hotel, was not responsible for its guests' professional obligations, but also wasn't going to facilitate anything she hadn't been asked to facilitate. He hadn't said thank you for any of it. This wasn't unusual. About 40% of guests at this level didn't. She'd made her peace with that early in her second month on the job. Thursday afternoon brought the incident. Hazel was in the middle of managing a check-in queue that had backed up because of a shuttle delay from YVR. 3 separate groups arriving simultaneously, 2 of them with complicated booking modifications, when Fletcher Strand appeared at the desk. He did not wait in the queue. He walked directly to Hazel's station, which was handling a family of 4 from Calgary, who were trying to get 2 connecting rooms with a crib. I need this sorted, he said, and placed a key card on the counter. Hazel held up one finger to indicate she'd be a moment. This was standard. This was the thing you did. The Calgary family, to their credit, looked sympathetic. I don't have a moment, Strand said. Mr. Strand, I'll be right with you as soon as. The key isn't working. I've been to my floor twice. This is basic competence. I understand, and I'm going to fix that for you. I just need 2 minutes to. This is exactly the kind of thing that happens when hotels let their standards slip. His voice hadn't risen dramatically. It didn't need to. It carried the particular authority of someone accustomed to having their displeasure treated as data. I've been a guest here for years, and I'm standing at this desk being made to wait while you. Mr. Strand. He stopped, not because she'd said his name loudly. She hadn't. She'd said it at exactly the same volume she used for everything else, which was clear and professional and designed to carry across a lobby without sounding like a public address system. The Calgary father had gone still. His wife was watching with the cautious attention of someone who had decided this was no longer about her connecting rooms. I am in the middle of checking in a family who has been waiting patiently, Hazel said. She kept her voice level. She kept her hands flat on the desk. I will fix your key card. It will take approximately 90 seconds once I'm finished here. If you raise your voice at me in this lobby again, I will ask my manager to take over your account for the remainder of your stay. Nobody in the lobby moved. Fletcher Strand looked at her for a long moment. He had the dark grey eyes of someone who had spent decades in boardrooms where the person with the most patience usually won, and he had, from all evidence, excellent patience in those contexts. He was not accustomed to deploying it at a hotel front desk. He picked up his key card. He walked to the seating area by the window and sat down. Hazel finished checking in the Calgary family, apologized for the wait, gave the children individual candy canes from the basket they kept behind the desk for exactly these moments, and then walked to the card reader, reprogrammed the presidential suite key, walked to where Fletcher Strand was sitting and handed it to him. It should work now, she said. I've also extended your checkout to 2 p.m., Sunday at no additional charge for the inconvenience with the queue. He took the key card. You just reprimanded me, he said. It wasn't accusatory. It was the tone of someone noting something factually unusual. I explained our service process, Hazel said. He looked up at her then, really looked at her, the way people look when they've been functioning on assumption and something has interrupted it. Go, she said pleasantly. Enjoy your afternoon. She walked back to the desk, was pretending to look at her computer screen with the focused intensity of someone who had seen everything, and was going to keep seeing nothing. "Don't. I didn't say anything," Priya said. "I know. I was just going to say," Priya said, "that the Calgary dad tipped you $20 in the comment card and put your name in it." Hazel exhaled. "Good. I need the $20. She didn't see Fletcher Strand again until Friday morning. She was at the staff entrance on the side of the building, eating her lunch at 11:40 a.m., because that was when her break fell, standing beside the recycling bins, because there was nowhere else to stand in the November cold that wasn't directly in the wind. She had a container of rice and lentils that she'd made Sunday night and portioned into 4 days of lunches, because she'd done the math and it worked out to roughly $1.80 a serving. He came around the corner from the parking structure. He was in a coat and no tie, which was different enough from his usual presentation that she'd taken a half-second to register who it was. He saw her. She looked at him with the same expression she'd used at the front desk. Professional, unreadable, slightly warm in the way the hotel expected. "You're eating lunch outside," he said. "It's 4 degrees. The staff lounge is full on Fridays." He looked at the recycling bins, the container of rice, the fact of the whole situation. "Is that standard?" he said. It wasn't condescending. He sounded like a man who had not previously thought about what hotel staff did on their lunch breaks and was now processing the information. "We make it work," Hazel said. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You don't need to. I was rude." She waited. "It wasn't about the keycard," he said. "I'd had a call before I came down, a difficult one. I took it out on you. That was wrong." Hazel Morrow, who had been in customer service long enough to recognize the difference between a real apology and a liability management statement, kept her expression steady and waited for the rest of it. "I'm telling you that," he said, "because it's accurate, not because I expect anything from it." She looked at him for a moment in the November cold. "Thank you," she said, because it was the appropriate response and also because she meant it, which surprised her slightly. He nodded once, like a man completing an item on a list. He went inside. She ate the rest of her rice. That night she told Owen about it while she was making dinner. Owen was at the kitchen table with his physiotherapy exercises, the ones he could do seated, slowly working through the routine his therapist had printed out for him. "The guy apologized," he said. "In the parking lot power move," Owen said. "I don't think it was a move. I think he was just." She stirred the soup. He seemed surprised that he'd done it, like it came out before he'd decided to say it. Owen considered this with the careful attention he applied to most things since the accident, as if he'd come to believe that thinking before speaking was a practice worth adopting. "You're going to see him again," he said. "He checks out Sunday. He'll be back. I'm just saying." He was right. But that wasn't the point. Fletcher Strand checked out Sunday at 1:45 p.m. He stopped at the front desk. Hazel happened to be the one there. "The stay was good," he said. "I'd like to leave a note for your file." "That's not necessary." "It's accurate," he said, using her word from the parking lot. Something crossed his face that wasn't quite a smile but lived in the same neighborhood. He left a written comment card, which Hazel did not read until after he'd gone. It said, "Front desk service, specifically H. Morrow, exceptional, handles pressure without losing dignity. This is rare. Please pass along." Priya read it over Hazel's shoulder. "Morrow," she said, "that's you. I'm aware. Handles pressure without losing dignity," Priya said. "He's describing himself losing dignity, by the way. That's what that is." "I know," Hazel said, "I know." She put the card in her locker and didn't think about it for the rest of the shift. She thought about it considerably on the bus home. 3 weeks later, she got a call from a number she didn't recognize. She was helping Owen do his physiotherapy, the standing exercises now, which he could manage for about 12 minutes before his back started to disagree. She answered because Owen had a follow-up appointment that week, and she'd given the clinic her number as a secondary contact. It was not the clinic. "Miss Morrow," a woman's voice, professional, precise. "My name is Audrey Lamb. I'm calling on behalf of Strand Capital Group regarding a potential opportunity we think you might be interested in." Hazel moved to the kitchen. "What kind of opportunity?" "A facilities and guest experience coordination role. It's a new position within our development portfolio, managing hospitality standards across 3 of our Vancouver properties. Mr. Strand personally suggested your name." Hazel looked at the calendar on her refrigerator. The BCIT registration deadline was March 14th. "What does it pay?" Audrey Lamb named a number that was considerably higher than $16.75 an hour. It also included benefits, which was the word that reached into Hazel's chest and did something involuntary to her breathing. "I need to think about it," Hazel said. "Of course. There's no timeline pressure." She hung up. She stood in the kitchen for a moment. Owen called from the living room, asking if she wanted tea. She said yes. She came back to the living room and they did the rest of the exercises, and she didn't mention the call because she hadn't decided how to think about it yet, and she didn't like to talk about things she hadn't decided how to think about. That night she sat at the kitchen table with a notepad and wrote down what she knew. A powerful man had been rude to her in front of guests. She had held her ground. He had apologized, which was unexpected. He had left a comment card with her name on it, which was more unexpected. And now, someone from his company was calling to offer her a job that would change the math of her life considerably. She wrote at the bottom of the page, "Is this genuine or is this something else?" She sat, what the question? Then she wrote, "What if it's both?" She tore the page out. She did not throw it away. She folded it in half and put it in the drawer, and the provincial coverage reassessment letter, and the BCIT brochure she'd downloaded and printed and folded and unfolded enough times that the creases were starting to separate. The Meridian Grand had a policy about employees accepting positions with current or recent guests. It wasn't prohibited, but it required disclosure and a conversation with HR. And it had a 30-day cooling-off window after a guest's last day. Hazel knew this because she'd read the employee handbook in her second week and had the kind of memory that retained procedural detail the way other people retained song lyrics. She called Audrey Lamb back on a Thursday. She said she had questions. Audrey Lamb, to her credit, had answers for all of them, including the ones about reporting structure, the ones about the scope of actual authority versus coordination versus optics, and the one Hazel considered most important, whether the position had existed before her name came up or whether it had been created around her. There was a pause. "That's a very direct question," Audrey said. "I know," Hazel said. "The role was conceptually in planning," Audrey said carefully. "Your name accelerated the timeline." Hazel absorbed this. "Is that a problem?" Audrey asked. "I don't know yet," Hazel said honestly. "Can I meet with Mr. Strand before I decide?" Another pause. "I'll arrange it." The meeting was not in a boardroom. It was in the lobby restaurant of a different hotel. Neutral ground, she thought, deliberately chosen. On a Wednesday morning. Fletcher Strand was already seated when she arrived, in a charcoal coat with a coffee in front of him, and he stood when she walked in, which she hadn't expected. They ordered. She got tea because she was trying to spend less on coffee, and also because she wanted her hands occupied with something she could wrap them around. "Why me?" she asked once the server had gone. She decided on the bus over that the most efficient use of the meeting was to ask the question she actually wanted answered. He didn't deflect. "Because of what I saw." "What did you see?" "You told me to wait, in front of other guests, without raising your voice, without losing the professional register, without backing down." He looked at his coffee. "I've been trying to hire someone for that coordination role for 4 months. The candidates have been technically competent, which isn't the same thing as what I need. I need someone who knows how standards are supposed to feel from the inside, not just from a spreadsheet. You barely spoke to me 3 times. I know what I need," he said. "I've been building things for 27 years. You learn to read rooms." Hazel looked at him. In the daylight, away from the hotel's controlled lighting, he looked like someone who had been carrying a significant amount of something for a significant amount of time, not broken by it. "I looked you up," she said. He nodded, as if this were expected and acceptable. "The Burrard Inlet contract," she said. "The editorial in the province 2 years ago. The editorial was selective about which facts it included," he said. "That's not me dismissing it. Some of what it said was accurate. Some of it was written by someone with a source who had personal reasons for being unflattering." Which parts were accurate? He looked at her for a moment, the grey eyes, the patience. "The subcontractor situation on the Burrard project was handled in a way I wouldn't handle it again," he said. "Workers were told they'd be reclassified before they actually were. The gap was about 8 weeks, and during that gap their coverage lapsed. Nobody was hurt, but they could have been. I settled 3 of them. The settlements were fair. The situation shouldn't have occurred." He said this the way someone says something they have said before, not because it's rehearsed, but because they've had to sit with it long enough to find the plain language for it. "Why are you telling me that?" Hazel asked. "Because you asked, and because," he said, "I'm aware of the way this looks, from your side of the table. A man with money and influence creates a job and offers it to a woman who called him out. That could be a lot of things. I'd rather you know who you're actually dealing with." Hazel wrapped both hands around her tea. "My brother was hurt on a site," she said. She hadn't planned to say it. It came out because the subcontractor conversation had made it relevant, and she didn't believe in withholding relevant information. He went still. "Not yours," she said. "Different company. 18 months ago. He's recovering. But the coverage situation you're describing, that particular gap, I know what that looks like from the other side." Fletcher Strand said nothing for a moment, the kind of nothing that is different from having nothing to say. "I'm sorry," he said. "That's a hard thing." "It's been instructive," Hazel said, which was the honest version of fine. He looked at her for a long time. She had the feeling of being read with considerable attention, which should have been uncomfortable and was instead, strangely, not. "I'll want 3 months before I decide if it's working," she said. "A genuine probationary period, in both directions. If I determine in month 2 that the role is decorative, I want to be able to leave without friction. That's reasonable. I'll want it in the agreement. Audrey will include it, and I'll need to give the Meridian Grand a proper notice period. 4 weeks, of course." She picked up her tea. She looked at him. "Why did you stand when I walked in?" The question surprised him slightly. She could see it in the small shift around his eyes. "My mother," he said finally. "She was very specific about that. Standing when someone enters a room. I stopped doing it for about 15 years. I started again about 3 years ago." "What happened 3 years ago?" "My mother died," he said, "and I realized I had stopped doing approximately 40 things she had considered basic, so I started doing them again." Hazel didn't say she was sorry because he hadn't said it to request sympathy. She simply nodded, the way you nod when someone has told you something true. She said yes to the position 11 days later. She told Owen over dinner. He put his fork down. "Hazel, I know. You're leaving the hotel for a guy who threw a key card at you." He slid it across the desk. "It's different, is it?" She told him the salary. He was quiet for a moment. "That covers the physio gap," he said. His voice was carefully neutral. "And then some," she said. Owen looked at his plate. He had her same dark brown hair, the same specific stubborn set to his jaw, the quality that their mother had called too much alike and meant as a criticism, and which had turned out to be one of the most useful things either of them had inherited. "I don't want you to do this because of me," he said. "I know," Hazel said. "I'm doing it because the role is real, and the money is real, and I looked into it as thoroughly as I could in 11 days. You are one factor among several. A significant one. But one." He looked at her for a long time. "You're sure?" "I'm not sure of anything," she said, "but I'm going to do it anyway." She gave the Meridian Grand 4 weeks' notice. Her manager, a man named Patrick who had hired her and genuinely seemed disappointed, asked twice if there was anything they could do to keep her. She said no both times, which was the honest answer, and the second time she said it, she noticed how much easier it was than she'd expected. On her last day, Priya gave her a card signed by the desk staff and the concierge team and 2 of the bellmen. Inside it, she'd written, "You held your ground." That's the whole story. Feasel put it in her bag and kept it. The Strand Capital offices were on the 14th floor of a building on Georgia Street, with a view of the harbour that cost considerably more per square foot than anything Hazel had previously worked near. Her first week was an orientation, structured by Audrey, who turned out to be rigorous and direct and funny in the specific way of people who have worked for powerful men for long enough to have developed a carefully maintained private sense of humour about it. Hazel crossed paths with Fletcher Strand 3 times that week. Each time, he treated her with the same attention he'd given the conversation in the restaurant. Specific, present, no performative warmth and no distance either. On Friday, he stopped in the doorway of the small office she'd been given and said, "How was the week?" "Functional," she said. "That's the bar for the first week," he said, which wasn't quite a smile either, but continued to live near one. The role was real. This was the thing she'd most needed to verify, and it verified itself within the first month. She had actual authority over vendor contracts on 2 of the 3 properties. She ran 2 staff training sessions that the hotel managers treated, to her relief, as legitimate rather than obligatory. She identified a linen service billing error that had been going unnoticed for 8 months and recovered a substantial amount in credit. She wrote a guest experience protocol revision that Audrey, reading it, called clean. She did not, in those first months, spend significant time with Fletcher Strand. Their interactions were professional, occasional, and contained. She would not have called them warm exactly, but they had the quality of interactions between people who had agreed, without discussing it, to be honest with each other. What she learned, in pieces, through Audrey and through documents and through the kind of observation that becomes second nature when you've worked a front desk long enough. He had a daughter, 21. She was at UBC studying environmental planning, and their relationship was, in Audrey's careful phrasing, a work in progress. He had been focused on the business in a way that had taken up space that should have had other things in it. He was aware of this. He was working on it. He had been divorced for 6 years. His ex-wife, a woman named Patricia, lived in West Vancouver and ran a landscape architecture firm that was, by all evidence, doing extremely well. He spoke of her on the one occasion the subject came up, which Hazel thought was either very no bitterness or the result of a very expensive therapist, and she did not ask which. On a Tuesday in January, she passed him in the corridor outside the boardroom, and he said, without stopping, "Your protocol revision is being implemented at the Barad property starting next month." She said, "Let me know if it needs adjustment," and kept walking. She stood in the corridor for a moment after he'd gone. She thought, this man respects outcomes. It was not a complicated insight, but it was a useful one, and it made her understand something about how to operate in the space she was now in. February brought the crisis. One of the Strand Capital properties, a boutique hotel in Gastown, had a burst pipe that damaged 12 rooms and the lobby ceiling the week before Valentine's Day, which was the worst possible timing in hospitality. Hazel spent 4 days coordinating relocations, contractor timelines, guest communications, and insurance documentation. Largely from a temporary desk set up in the hotel's back office, she ate vending machine sandwiches. She got 4 hours of sleep 2 nights in a row. She handled a journalist who showed up without an appointment and 3 separate guests who wanted to speak to someone with authority, which she was, though 2 of them had visibly not expected that. Fletcher Strand came to the Gastown property on day 3. He stood in the back office and looked at what she'd managed. The spreadsheet on the wall, the contractor schedule, the stack of completed guest communication logs. "You should go home," he said. "I'm finishing the insurance summary. It can wait until morning." It can't. The adjuster wants it by end of day. He looked at the spreadsheet. He looked at her. "The adjuster's deadline is a preference," he said, "not a legal requirement. I know this particular adjuster. He's been working with us for 8 years. I'll call him and push it to tomorrow morning." She was too tired to argue about whether that was technically true, and also she had decided at some point in month 2 that arguing with him about procedural details was not a productive use of either of their time when he was probably right. "Fine," she said. "Go home," he said. "Sleep." "I will." He started to leave. Then he paused. "How's your brother?" he said. She looked up. He had never asked about Owen before, not in any conversation. She hadn't told him anything beyond what she'd said in the restaurant. "Better," she said. "He started a partial return to work last month. Office admin. Different industry." The word had weight in it, the kind of weight that comes from someone who has thought about something without saying it. "You looked into it," she said, not accusatory, simply reading what was in front of her. He didn't deny it. "I had someone check whether there were any outstanding regulatory issues with the site. There weren't. The company settled. I wasn't trying to interfere. What were you trying to do?" He considered this for a moment. "Make sure you were walking into a situation where I wasn't one more person who made your life more complicated," he said. Hazel looked at him for a long moment. "That's a very careful thing to do," she said. "I've been known to be careful," he said, "about specific things." She went home. She slept 7 hours. She came back in the morning and submitted the insurance summary, which the adjuster received and responded to within the hour. The thing that was building between them had no clean name. She noticed this because she was the kind of person who named things when she could, who found clarity useful, and this situation resisted it. It wasn't professional distance, somewhere around month 2. It wasn't friendship exactly, because there was something in the way he looked at her that she recognized as something else, and she'd been honest with herself about it since January. She mentioned it to Owen obliquely one evening in March. He was making dinner now on the nights she worked late, which had started as something he did once and had become, without discussion, a contribution he'd claimed as his. She said, "There's a situation at work that I'm not sure how to categorize." Owen, without turning from the stove, "Is it Strand? Why do you assume?" "Because you categorize everything else fine," he said. "You've never once mentioned needing to categorize anything at that job except the parts that involve him." "Hazel sat at the complicated," she said. "Most things worth doing are," Owen said. "That's not actually helpful." "I know," he said, "but it's true. She went for a walk after dinner, the long one along the seawall that she used when she needed to think without the apartment around her. November's version of the same walk had been cold and practical. March's was cold and different in a way she was not quite ready to explain. She thought about what she had walked into, and what she had walked into it knowing. She had known the situation was complicated. She had known about the Barad Inlet editorial, about the subcontractor gap, about the investigation that had preceded his name being cleared. She had known she was going to work for a man with a difficult history and a complicated present and children he was trying to do better by. She had gone in anyway, and the fact that she'd gone in with her eyes open meant she was responsible for what she chose next. On a Friday afternoon in April, after the Gastown property had reopened and the quarter was more or less closed, and the work had reached one of those natural plateaus where the urgency stopped piling up. Fletcher Strand knocked on her open office door. "There's a thing," he said. On Saturday, she waited. "My daughter is presenting her research project, Sustainable Urban Drainage. There's a reception afterward. I've been trying to attend her things and failing, in approximately a 1-to-2 ratio. I'm planning to attend this one." He paused. "I'd like it if you came." "As what?" she asked. Not pointedly, genuinely. "As someone I'd like to have there," he said. "I'm aware that's not a category with a title. It's not." "I'm aware," he said again. "I still mean it." She looked at him. This man who had thrown a key card across her desk 4 months ago, who had stood in a parking lot in November and apologized without being asked, who had called the insurance adjuster and asked about Owen and looked into a construction site she'd never named, who stood when she entered a room because his mother had considered it basic. "What time?" she said. Something moved across his face, something she'd been watching for in small increments since October and had now seen clearly, finally. It was not complicated. It was relief. It was the relief of a person who has been trying to do something carefully and has been given the first real signal that it might be going somewhere that matters. 2 o'clock, he said. "The reception's at 4. I'll be there," she said. His daughter, Cressida, was tall and had her father's grey eyes and none of his economy with words. She spoke about bioswales and permeable paving with the specific velocity of someone who has found the thing they actually care about. She shook Hazel's hand at the reception and said, "Dad said you're the one who told him to stop being impressive at people and start being present." Hazel looked at her. "I said something like that." "It worked," Cressida said. "He came to my seminar in February. He asked a question. It was about drainage coefficients, and it was actually a reasonable question, which surprised everyone, including me. She said this with the specific affection of someone who loves a difficult person and has decided to say so clearly. On the drive back, Fletcher Strand was quiet for a while. Then he said, "She cried when I walked in. In February. She tried to hide it. She didn't mention that," Hazel said. "She wouldn't," he said. "She's too much like me." He was quiet another moment. "I've been trying to be different things, in different orders, for most of my adult life. More successful, more strategic, better protected against the next thing that could go wrong. It took me until now to understand that I had the order backward." "What's the right order?" Hazel asked. He glanced at her. "Present," he said. "First, then the rest." She looked out at the city moving past the window. Vancouver in April had a particular quality of light that she had lived with her whole life and never quite had words for. Silver and clean and full of something that was almost a promise. "That's not a small thing to figure out," she said. "No," he said. "It isn't." He pulled up to her building on Canby Street. He didn't move to get out, which she appreciated, because she hadn't decided yet what tonight was, only that it had been real. "I'm not rushing this," he said. "Whatever it is, good," she said. "Neither am I. But I want you to know," he said, "that I've been paying attention. Since October. To all of it. That's not nothing." "I know," she said. "I've been paying attention too." She got out of the car. She stood on the sidewalk for a moment. He waited until she'd reached the door, which she noted, and then he pulled away. She went upstairs. Owen was on the couch with his physiotherapy stretches and a documentary about seabirds, which was his current Tuesday interest. "How was it?" he said. She sat down beside him. "Good," she said. He looked at her for a moment with the careful attention he'd developed in the last year, the one that saw more than he used to. "Yeah, I can tell." They watched the seabirds for a while. Outside, Vancouver did what it did in April, held some cold back, let some warmth through, stayed uncertain and genuinely itself. Hazel Morrow had come into a job with a plan and a deadline, and a very clear sense of what she needed the next chapter to look like. The plan had changed. The deadline had shifted. The chapter was different from the one she'd outlined on that notepad on the kitchen table. She was not the kind of person who found that comfortable. She was becoming, slowly, the kind of person who found it worth it. On the seawall, months earlier, she had drawn a line. She had not drawn it to be dramatic. She had drawn it because she was tired and correct, and had nothing left to give to someone who thought her visible effort was invisible inconvenience. The line had held. And something on the other side of it, it turned out, had been worth the holding.